Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, if you do enjoy the video that you came here to watch, do me a favor, go ahead and hit that little red subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. It really does help my audience grow. It really does help this channel grow. It means more than you realize. So go ahead, hit that little red button. Also, remember, full episodes of the Aaron Torres Podcast, wherever you download your podcast, Apple, Spotify, etc. Now, here is the video that you came here for. But where I want to start is with a game that I don't know if it's technically off the radar. It's a great SEC rivalry, but it's a game that isn't getting a lot of pub. Neither team is ranked, and it is LSU and Auburn. And what I don't want to do is sit here and break down the game. And if Auburn's run defense does this against LSU's this, and what about LSU here? And that's not what I want to do. But instead, I want to kind of talk about it in the existential big picture, if you will. I was asked a question earlier in the week in a radio interview. I thought it was a great question, and this is how I kind of want to frame the conversation on Auburn. The question, if Auburn loses this game, is this the end of the Bryan Harsin era at Auburn? In other words, is this win or go home literally for Bryan Harsin? And while I don't think anybody knows, I saw there was a report by A.J. McCarron that he's already been fired. Nothing is confirmed. I'm not saying it did happen. I'm not saying it will happen. But should it happen? I'll be honest. I do think if Auburn loses, and I do think if it gets ugly on Saturday night in the Plains at home against an unranked LSU team, then yeah, I do think Bryan Harsin probably will be out as early as Sunday. And I'll be honest, I've switched my opinion on all this. I think it's probably for the best that they go ahead and do it, that Auburn goes ahead and makes the move. And I think some of you that aren't Auburn fans probably sitting back and saying, Torres, what are you talking about? It's only year 2 for Bryan Harsin, and this guy is 3-1 right now this season going into the LSU game this weekend. Well, what I would say is a couple things. One, what do I say all the time on this show? There are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics, okay? And the statistic that you see on that paper that says 3-1 is not reflective of who Auburn has been. First of all, the one loss, absolutely abysmal. We all watched the game. It was against Penn State. It was a big CBS game, Saturday afternoon. The Auburn crowd is there. The Auburn crowd is fired up. And Penn State just absolutely punked Auburn in that game. The final score was 41-12. But what was so jarring about that game was that in a matchup of by far the best team that they've played all year at home, Auburn just looked completely overwhelmed and overmatched by what is probably realistically the third or fourth best team in the Big Ten. Penn State finished that game. Obviously, 41-12 was the final score, but they ran all over Penn State, or they ran all over Auburn to the tune of like 6.5 yards per carry. You had Penn State fans telling me that it was the most dominant win against a pseudo-legitimate opponent of the James Franklin era. So you have that bad loss on your resume. But even the 3 wins aren't all that impressive, okay? Now, you open against Mercer, FCS team, whatever. Week 2, you play San Jose State. Not sure how many of you watched that. I think it was on SEC+++. Not even on SEC+. They didn't want to put it on SEC+, let alone the SEC network, let alone ESPN or ESPN2. 24-18 was the final score against the San Jose State team that, frankly, just isn't very good. It wasn't like, oh, San Jose State played the game of their lives and, Auburn was just on the wrong side of that. San Jose State is not a very good football team and not a very good football conference in the Mountain West. And then, of course, we also know what happened last week against Missouri. Back at home, off that loss to Penn State, and it was really ugly in that Missouri game. They did win the game, but we all saw how it went down. The final score was 17-14. Auburn finished the game with 217 yards of offense against what was the SEC's basically their worst defense last year. And more importantly, we all know that Auburn probably should have lost that game not once, but at least twice. Missouri missed a field goal as time expired. And also, they fumbled on the 1-yard line going in for the game-winning score in overtime. So the fact that Auburn is even 3-1 right now, is kind of a minor miracle. And I think the only stat you need to know, against FBS opponents this year, Auburn has actually been outscored through 3 games. And so you look at this team, you look at this program, and you look at the conversation as to why Bryan Harsin could potentially be fired if they were to lose this game and to lose it bad. There's a couple of reasons why. One, there's just no juice in this program, right? I mean, there's no pride in this program. The fact that you had, and listen, you can criticize Auburn fans for this, that, the other thing, I've said it many times. I don't love how they handled things last winter with Bryan Harsin, but the one thing you can't deny, they showed up in a big way for that Penn State game, and the team on the field did not show up for them. So it was bad enough. Great environment, great atmosphere. My buddy Matt, who runs the Torres on Auburn account, was at the game. He said it was as lively as any Auburn game he's been to in a very long time. So the fans showed up. After the offseason, the fans supported Bryan Harsin and this team in the first big game. They completely had a no-show. And then on top of that, to come back a week later against a bad Missouri team, and I know it was an 11 a.m. Central Time kickoff, but to have no fire, no energy, no passion in another home game, that's just really bad. And so if you lose to LSU on Saturday, you are now looking at 3-2 in what was supposed to be the easy part of the schedule. Listen, I said it at the beginning of the segment. I didn't think Bryan Harsin should be let go last year. I thought he should have the offseason to get things corrected. But this was supposed to be the easy part of the schedule, and I'll take it a step further. This was supposed to be the moment where you build momentum for when things get tough. This wasn't supposed to be the tough part. This was supposed to be the part where things are easy to build for when it gets tough. 5 straight home games to start the year. If you're 3-2, what hope do you have for the rest of the season? Look at Auburn's schedule from here. After this week, they play at Georgia. After this week, they play at Ole Miss after Georgia. So the next 2 games, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, 2 teams currently ranked in the top 15. Then from there, you get a bye. You know who you play after that? Arkansas, ranked in the top 20. After that, you know who you play? Mississippi State, who beat you last year. Then you still have Texas A&M at home, and you still have Alabama on the road. So after this week, you have 7 games left. 5 are against ranked opponents. One of the 5 that is not against a ranked opponent is a team that beat you last year at home in Mississippi State. And so if you can't get through this stretch 3-2, there's no reason to think you can turn it around. And what I would say is, like I just said a minute ago, there's no juice in the program. There's no reason to really believe that things will get fixed with more time. It's certainly not going to get fixed against Georgia. It's not going to get fixed against Ole Miss. It's not going to get fixed against Arkansas. And I look at this team and I look at this program, and a few things stand out. One, I don't even know if Bryan Harsin wants this job anymore. 2, I would think that if you get another lifeless effort on a Saturday night at home against an SEC West rival, I don't see the reason to stick by Bryan Harsin and the reason to believe that not only can he figure it out, but that you should give him more time to figure it out. It's really interesting. I think back to when Scott Frost was let go at Nebraska. At Nebraska, he never coached at Auburn, I know. At Nebraska. And the AD, Trev Alberts, said, I think these kids just need a new voice. And I do wonder, after watching Bryan Harsin on the sidelines the last 2 weeks, after watching him in a press conference the last 2 weeks, I do wonder if maybe Auburn just needs a new voice in that locker room. And to be clear, I have not always been in this camp. This is something I will say. The more that I cover college football, the more that I'm around it, the more that I see this up close and in person, how the sausage gets made, if you will. I used to think, give a guy the extra year, give him 2 years, give him 3, you need at least 3-4 years. I don't believe it is that way anymore. And not only do I not believe it's that way, I believe that it's almost a hindrance to keep people around. First of all, we know how this whole thing works. You now have to fire coaches earlier in the season so you can get the next guy in place for the recruiting cycle, right? That's what USC did last year. They ended up with Lincoln Riley. That's what LSU did last year. They ended up with Brian Kelly. That's what Nebraska, Arizona State, and Georgia Tech did. So 1, you just have to do it to get the next guy in place to get going for the recruiting periods in December and February. But then 2, money is no longer an issue. And 3, this whole thing can be flipped really quick. And I do think it's interesting that if LSU ends up being Bryan Harsin's last stand, it's kind of interesting to me because LSU is the perfect example of, and I'm not saying Brian Kelly's the right guy. I'm not saying he's fixed everything, but they're 3-1. They've looked really good the last 3 weeks, and they're starting to play like a good football team. Brian Kelly came in, hit the transfer portal hard, recruited as well as he could in that class. Now, he didn't have a great recruiting class in 2022, but he's already got a jump start on 2023, top 6, top 7 class, and he was really aggressive in the portal, and now the guys that he got in the portal are having success. Jaden Daniels, the quarterback, Noah Kane, the running back. There's a few guys on the offensive line that are playing well. There's a few guys on the defense that are playing well. But to me, I used to be that guy. Give it time, take a deep breath, everybody relax. It's going to be fine. But when you're Bryan Harsin, you haven't really, one, I don't even know that you want to be there. Two, it doesn't feel like the players are playing hard to keep your job. You've never shown an ability to recruit at the highest level. I am with Auburn fans that feel like, look, if this weekend is the game, if this weekend is the one that it gets out of hand, I would have no fundamental issue if Bryan Harsin is let go at Auburn this Saturday.